Hey everyone, before we dive into the heart of darkness today, do me a solid. Hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Why? Because this isn't just a dusty history lesson. This is a psychological autopsy, a story about a concrete tomb for a man's delusions, and a warning that humanity seems to forget every few generations. And at the end, I want to hear from you in the comments. Sound good? Let's get into it. Spring 1945. Berlin, but not the grand, orderly, imperial city of his dreams. This Berlin is hell on earth. Brick dust, smoke, the ceaseless, earth-shaking roar of Soviet artillery shells landing not on some distant front, but just streets away from the government quarter. And beneath it all, under about 8 meters of reinforced concrete and earth, lies the Führerbunker. A maze of small rooms, cramped halls, and dead ends. The air smells of damp concrete, gasoline from the generators, fear, and madness. Here, in less than 500 square meters of space, a fabricated world is gasping its last breaths. A world 12 years in the making. A world that cost tens of millions of lives. And its architect, its Führer, Adolf Hitler, sits at the center like a spider in a collapsing web. What has always struck me isn't the scale of the evil, but its utter banality in the end. A tyrant who dreamed of a 1,000-year Reich, of global dominion, of new palaces and cities, dies in a cramped cellar, identified by his socks and trousers, his body burned in a shell crater in the garden of the old chancellery. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. This story isn't about death. It's about what happens in the mind of a man who cornered the world, only to find himself cornered. It's the story of a fabricated reality shattering under the weight of the real one, iron hard and merciless. To understand how he got there, we need a quick but crucial detour. Economics and history are two sisters who always walk hand in hand. Post-World War I Germany was a humiliated, broken nation. The Treaty of Versailles in 1919 wasn't a peace. It was a can opener for the next war. Reparations were crippling. Industry was in ruins. Inflation reached such absurd heights, people needed wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. It was on this despair, this national trauma, that Hitler played. He was a brilliant demagogue. He didn't talk about complex economic reforms. He spoke of simple things: guilt, betrayal, a master race, Lebensraum, living space. He gave Germans a myth, not a plan. And for a time, the myth was stronger than reality. Initially, the economy of the Third Reich, masterminded by the financial wizard Hjalmar Schacht, did recover. Massive public works, secret rearmament, slave labor. It created an illusion of power. But this was a pyramid scheme economy, a war economy. It could only exist through expansion, through looting other nations. Annex Austria, get resources. Take Czechoslovakia, get the Skoda factories. Conquer France, plunder its gold. But the moment the expansion stopped, the pyramid began to crumble. And it stopped at Moscow, at Stalingrad. By 1944, the Reich's economy was held together by slave labor, by plunder, and by the fanatical will of one man. And when that man retreated into his bunker, everything fell apart. So we return to April 45. The bunker. Our key witness to the final act of this tragedy is a man named Otto Gunsch. Young, just 25, an SS Sturmbannführer, Hitler's personal adjutant. He was the Führer's shadow until the very end. And his testimonies, only recently declassified and published by Russia's FSB, are a unique document. A view from inside the death throes of a regime. Captured, Gunsch initially said little, but later talked to a fellow prisoner, who then related all to SMERSH, Soviet military counterintelligence. History is written by the victors, but sometimes it's also recorded by the voices of the vanquished. What did Gunsch see? He saw a man who had long since stopped living in the real world. After the failed assassination attempt in July 44, the Stauffenberg bomb plot that nearly killed him, Hitler became utterly convinced of his own invincibility, his mystical, providential destiny. He believed fate was guiding him to a grand purpose. Even with Soviet troops on Berlin streets, he waited for a miracle. He waited for General Wang's Phantom Army to relieve the city. He waited for the Allies to fall out. It was a classic clinical picture, megalomania multiplied by a complete detachment from reality. April 20th, 1945. Hitler's 56th birthday. His last. Up to the shattered chancellery came the titans of the Reich. The Korpus Göring, the loyal Heinrich Himmler, Admiral Donitz, Field Marshal Keitel. They offered congratulations, shook hands, spoke of loyalty. Within days, almost all of them would betray him or scramble to save their own skins. Göring, hearing Hitler would stay in Berlin, sent a telegram asking if he should assume leadership as the designated successor. Hitler called it treason and ordered his arrest. Himmler, through a Swedish diplomat, was already deep in secret negotiations with the Western Allies, naively hoping to lead a post-war Germany. The inner circle was disintegrating before his eyes. And Hitler himself? What was his life like in those final weeks? Gunch described his day. He woke late, around 1 in the afternoon, but not from restful sleep. He'd worked until 7 a.m., and from 4 to 7, he'd drink tea alone, poring over papers. Then a vegetarian breakfast. He'd been off meat for years. Then military conferences, which devolved into hysterical monologues. He'd scream at his generals, accuse them of cowardice and betrayal, rant that the German people had failed him, that they deserved to perish. Then lunch, again alone. Hitler hated eating in front of people. He was a pathologically lonely man. He fancied himself not a mere politician, but a messiah, a being of a higher order, above simple human frailties. Even his marriage to Eva Braun, which we'll get to, fit this pattern not as an act of love, but as a ritual gesture before death. Eva Braun, a figure often overlooked. Gunch, by the way, spoke well of her, pretty modest, stayed in the background. She'd been with Hitler for over a decade, but to the world, she didn't exist. Only in the final days did she step into the light. According to the adjutant, Hitler married her only because he had decided to die. He hadn't wanted to bind himself in marriage while he was the living god of the nation. But since the end was near, why not grant his loyal companion the title of Frau Hitler? A chilling, cynical logic. On April 29th, the day before his death, a strange, hurried wedding took place in the bunker. Hitler in uniform, Eva in a dark silk dress. A minor official found in a nearby shelter performed the ceremony. There was a modest reception with champagne. The witnesses were Bormann and Goebbels. This wasn't the start of a family life, but its punctuation. One final gesture of control over a reality slipping through his fingers. April 30th, after lunch, it happened. Gunch recalled Eva Braun calmly approaching him, saying goodbye. 15 minutes later, a single gunshot rang out from the Führer's study. When the adjutant entered, Hitler was slumped on a sofa, a bullet through his temple. Next to him lay Eva, dead from cyanide. Following Hitler's orders, their bodies were to be burned. The irony? The man who dreamed of granite monuments asked to be turned to ash and scattered. But even here, absurdity reigned. Gunch, the man tasked with overseeing the burning, didn't really see it happen. Hitler's body was carried out wrapped in a blanket or on a stretcher. The accounts vary. The face was covered. The adjutant identified his Führer by his trousers, socks, and shoes. You heard that right. The dictator before whom Europe trembled was identified by his socks. The bodies were taken to the garden, placed in a shell crater, doused in gasoline, and set alight. But the fire burned poorly, under constant shelling, and the cremation was botched. The remains would later be found by Soviet soldiers. And the other inhabitants of the bunker? Goebbels, loyal to the end, poisoned his 6 children the next day before he and his wife committed suicide. Martin Bormann, the gray eminence of Nazism, tried to flee and is believed to have been killed in a firefight. Many others, General Bergdorf, Hitler Youth leader Axmann, chose a bullet or cyanide over Soviet captivity. And Otto Gunch, his fate is its own strange chapter. Captured by the Soviets, sentenced to 25 years in the Gulag, he was released in 1955 after West German Chancellor Adenauer's visit to Moscow and handed over to East German authorities. From there, he escaped to West Germany and found a quiet harbor. He got a job in the pharmaceutical industry, lived a long, peaceful life, and died in 2003. The man who witnessed one of the darkest finales of the 20th century died in his bed in a united, peaceful Germany. There's a deep historical paradox in that. So what does all this mean for us? Why do we, almost 80 years later, keep circling back to those dark days in the Berlin bunker? Because this isn't a story about one lone madman. It's a story about a system, about how one person, armed with simple, hateful myths and ruthless will, can captivate an entire nation, leveraging its pain, its fear, its economic desperation. It's a story about how a fabricated world, a world of racial superiority, world domination, a thousand-year empire, can, for a time, eclipse the real one. But in the end, reality always wins. It arrives in the form of Soviet shells exploding by the Reichstag. It arrives in the betrayal of comrades. It arrives in the need to identify a corpse by its socks. Hitler in his bunker is the archetypal image of the tyrant in a trap he built for himself, with his hatred, his arrogance, his refusal to see the world as it is. His downfall was inevitable from the moment he decided he had the right to dispose of the fates of millions. History doesn't do what-ifs, but I'm confident, if not him, it would have been someone else. But the fact is, it was him, with his pathologies, his oratory, his will, who became that fatal trigger. And his finale, in a concrete hole, terrified of capture, disgraced in a botched burning in a garden crater, is the most potent lesson history can offer anyone who contemplates absolute power. All right, folks, we've walked through this grim but necessary history. I've told it straight, as one person to another, but with a deep respect for the facts and the memory of the victims. Now, I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and tell me, do you think this man and his machine could have been stopped sooner? Or was this collapse, like a train on tracks, inexorable? Your perspective is invaluable. And of course, if this deep dive resonated with you, if you want more of these detailed, gripping explorations of history's pivotal moments here on the channel, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and tap the notification bell. Because knowing history isn't about memorizing dates. It's about understanding human nature. And sometimes, it's about not stepping on the same rake. Thanks for staying with me till the end. See you in the next one.